Hi, good morning. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us here in the theater. And for the guys who have joined through Zoom, good morning. It's Friday the 13th. It's the beginning of spring, as you can see. Thank God. And we're really happy that this is our second keynote about design. And we're really happy to have all you here. The topic that we choose today was healthcare, and Mirko is going to talk a little bit about why. But we think that this is really cool. We have our own health and wellness team in the agency. They've been working with us for this speech. We have a great guest, and we all know that this is going to be a big, how do you say it? A big part of our future business, hopefully. The link of healthcare with everything that we do in our life today. It's key. And we're really excited that we can have a discussion about that and the role of design, obviously, in that space. So, Mirko, you want to say?
Let me explain to you why we're talking about design and healthcare today. In the latest year, the incredible technology innovation have made some great progress. And this brings healthcare in a profound transformation from a traditional curative approach to a preventive approach. Now, a preventive approach requires, a long-form and interactive relation with the audience. And this long-form interaction over the time, it becomes an experience. As you know, experience is the new product, and everyone talks about that. And customer today and patient and user compare experience and the value they give away. And all the time, someone in the market deploy a new, a better, and similar experience, this becomes the reference for the entire audience. And it's going to rise the expectation of the audience independently by the type of the contest and the industry. To be clear, for is not so much familiar about the definition of the experience, experience will mean the journey through all the touch points through a system. Independently by if these touch points are physical, digital, or hybrid. And much more important, there is no anymore distinction between what is patient, a customer, or user. Now, healthcare today is facing this challenge to deploy in the market aside traditional drugs or therapy, multidimensional experience where patient, customer, and user are converged all together as a new entity. Why design? Because design as a practice can help to shape, transform this kind of complex problem. That's the reason why today we're talking about design in the healthcare. And today we are lucky to have our guest, someone have a very deep knowledge and experience how to use in design to approach this kind of problematic system. I'm happy to introduce you on the stage, Roberto Veronese, former executive design on Frog Design and Method, and today Vice President of Product Design of Helix, a genomics company in San Francisco.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me here. I'll give you a quick introduction about myself, the work I'm doing at Helix, and then we'll talk about 3 themes related to the evolution of design and how design what role design can play in healthcare, in solving and addressing the problems that Mirko mentioned before. My experience has been mostly, in my career started in the late 90s in strategy and design firms, and just recently sort of joined Helix as a product company. I worked across different geographies, industry, different type of organizations, large organizations and startups. And specifically in the healthcare space, I worked with organizations like in the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, like to increase adherence to a treatment plan, or to sort of design and create like interfaces that allow surgeons to sort of plan robotic surgery. There's a lot, the healthcare space is very broad. And what's interesting today, and especially as Mirko mentioned, is the preventative space. How we can empower patients, and they're not just patients, but individuals, like sort of to take a preventative approach about their health. I'll tell you a little bit about Helix. Helix is a personal genomics company. It's most specifically a platform And it's a platform that enables different companies, different organizations to create products that are powered by DNA. What does that mean? It's similar to what you have on sort of on your phones. You have an app store where you can download apps, right? And there's a platform, there's an infrastructure that either Apple, Google, or others like are putting in place with APIs that make things easy to some extent for developers to build applications and products. Same thing we are doing. We are doing basically the same thing in Helix. We are basically creating a platform that allows different types of organizations. Could be large organizations like the Mayo Clinics or like small like startups to create products that are powered by DNA and that can offer value across a very broad range, a broad spectrum of categories. Our goal as a company is to empower everyone to learn about their sort of biological information, use that information to make informed decisions about especially about their health, but in general, about how it can improve their life. The journey starts from sort of what we call like a spit kit. So it's a DNA kit that is used to collect a sample of your saliva, so a sample of your DNA. This sample is delivered to our lab in San Diego, where we sequence the sample and we turn that into a digital code, essentially. And so basically, we reveal what's sort of the source code of you, right? And how this code is used is used to allow you to learn about yourself from very different lenses, right? So you can learn about your ancestry, you can learn about your family in the sense of what are the conditions that you might pass down to your children. You can learn about what's the right diet based on your biology, how to use that information or the potential that you have based on your traits and sort of innate inclinations to define a fitness plan or a training plan. And most importantly, for instance, what are the propensity that you have to develop certain type of diseases, right? And how you can take a preventative approach. So once you get sequenced, once you have unlock this asset that is inside you, that is your DNA, and you interpret that, you connect it with services that provide an interpretation of that code, you can learn different things, right, about yourself that might be relevant at different stages of your life. So in that sense, it's almost like it's a lifelong relationship with your data, with your information. So you can, depending on which stage of your life you're in, you have different needs. And so, for instance, like a sort of a teenager or a 20-year-old teenager now, because you need to be at least 80 years old in order to get sequenced. But let's say if you're very young and you haven't thought about having a family yet, probably you're not interested in knowing if you're about your carrier status, like what condition you might pass down. Maybe you're more interested in fitness or nutrition to sort of either lose weight or sort of improve your sport performance. But there's a sort of very broad range of sort of applications that are available today on our platform. And some, as you can see here, range really from recreational use, as we like to define entertainment, sort of curiosities, like traits, what's my sort of caffeine metabolism? Or what are the likelihood that between two people, what's the likelihood that their children of a couple will have curly hair or blue eyes, right? Things that are, of course, used more from a recreational perspective to ancestry, learning about where your ancestors came from and what the migration routes that they took. And what does that mean in terms of your metabolism? What are the things that you inherited? And what's not just the risk that you may have, but also what's the potential that you can have, especially when it comes to fitness and nutrition. There are not just the mobile application, maybe that slide might suggest that there are apps in that sense. There are a broad range of services, that most of them have a digital touch point, but also have a component of counseling, of customer service, that it's not only sort of expressed in terms of a digital product. And the number of this product is growing. We already have over 35 products on the platform, and more are coming, especially in the health industry. As you know, it's highly regulated, so things are a little slower, but we're getting there. There are very interesting apps that are coming up this year, and mostly sort of ranging from, of course, sort of conditions, health conditions that are related to cancer, for instance, or other genetic conditions that you should be aware of, and especially not just aware, but you should have the means and the tools to define a plan, a preventative plan, in order to decrease the risk of developing those conditions. DNA information, as we see it, is becoming so pervasive, to the point that, although this might look and is a provocation, right, become as commonplace as GPS, as location services. There are a lot of services that are not just health sort of related, that may be powered by information, by more genetic information, and then you can use that information to increase the level of personalization and value that these services will provide. The theme, of course, of today is to talk about the role of design and the evolution of design in the healthcare space. Of course, when we talk about design, and the only design I can think of is human-centered design, right? It's just design that starts from who's going to use that product, who's going to benefit from that product or service. And of course, this approach is paying off, in a sense. The companies that take this approach in starting from not just what are their business goals, their growth goals, but thinking about what's the benefit that we are introducing, what kind of value are we creating, and how this is going to benefit individuals. By taking that perspective, of course, you then design and build and develop everything around that. Of course, taking into consideration a lot of other factors, like, of course, business, technology, market. I'm introducing here sort of three perspectives about the evolution of design. These are mostly sort of based on, they're kind of notes from the field, or based on my experience over the past sort of decade or so, working especially in strategy and design firms, where strategy and design, the boundary between strategy and design is blurred, and that's a good thing, right? So using design as a strategic tool, rather than just thinking about design as the creation of an artifact. So the first perspective is about the definition of design that there's a spectrum, I'll say, in terms of the definition of design that goes from design as the thing, design as the artifact, and the production of it. And then design also as the process and the method that is used to build that artifact. So there's a sort of a distinction that is intrinsic to design, to the definition of design, between producing the design, and using design as a method, as a problem-solving sort of tool or process. When it comes to sort of making design, we're seeing an evolution in what it means to make design. Right? Making design can go from really building sort of an artifact over which you have full control, right? To transition to something that is less about like controlling upfront or knowing upfront all the possible ways this product will evolve over time or adapt to the use of that people will make of the design. So we're going from, as designers, from designing, making the design and defining all the design sort of upfront, to designing the sort of the rules, the ways or with the parameters within a design will evolve, almost self-optimize in order to address and be the needs and expectation of their users and become more valuable. Of course, would be necessary an entire sort of event just to talk about that, about like the role of generative design and computational design. But this is just to give a sort of a sense of how there's an evolution even within the concept of producing sort of design. But on the other side, how we're using design as a tool, as a method to define problems, first of all, and solve problems. So there's a lot of when you hear about like, the definition of design as a problem-solving practice or a problem-solving method, that's true, but that's not just about solving the problem. It's about framing the problem, right? And there's a famous quote, I don't even know if that's actually, he ever said that, but he said that if Einstein had an hour to solve a problem, we would spend 55 minutes to define and question the problem, 5 minutes to work on the solution, right? And that somehow, I wouldn't say that that's the right ratio, especially if you think about a project or initiative, but it's true that if you have clarity about the problem that you're solving, there's clarity of intent, and if you have all the information, you're making informed decisions related to the problem, what's the right problem to solve, then the solution also will be less risky. The process that you use to solve the problem will be less risky because you are addressing the right problem. You're addressing the right problem for your business, for instance. And this leads us to sort of the notion of how we define value. So design, as we said, it can be the artifact, it can be the process that leads to making something, but also is the process that defines what value is. So many cases we hear, and we are like in conversations like with different like stakeholders, different people involved in a design project, so in a more ample sense, like all the people are involved in the definition of a product and its development. And there's always a conversation, is this the right problem to solve? Are we designing it in the right way? So how we define right? And that's something that maybe this has come from my experience being a consultant and being part of these conversations where there was a lot of sort of a lot of time was just spent mostly in defining what was the right strategy, what the right approach, right? And design, of course, could bring value into that because designers usually bring the perspective of the consumer, right? They bring the perspective, they have a very good sense of what are they have a good sense of what consumers in the market want and need and expect. And that's used to inform shape the conversation around like what's right for the company to do. But answering that question about what's right, it's basically answering the question as what should we do rather than what we can do, what can we do? And defining right means that you need to be aware, not just about the perspective of the consumer, but you need to know or sort of have a good sense of what that company as a brand stands for, like what the values of that company. What are the values in the audience? What are the business KPIs, for instance? What's the technology that will be used? So all the sort of these different sort of dimensions need to be taken into account in order to define what's the right thing to do and how to do it right. The third perspective is about experience. And experience, as Mirka introduced, is just really the interaction that between an individual and that service or product over time across different touch points. And many times we hear and we'll see the touch points. So we think design is being used to create that application, that website, that service, but design can take a much greater, more systemic sort of approach to defining what an experience. So can take really the approach of orchestrating, choreographing, like the experience that individuals will have across touch points in between them, and making it intentional. Everything that we use delivers an experience. The difference is that if that thing or that service was designed to generate that experience or not. Right? We cannot design an experience. The experience is subjective. Right? We can design for an experience. In order to design for an experience, we need to know what kind of experience we want to generate, first of all, of course, and what are the factors that will contribute to create that experience and work on them. And be consistent and be coherent across our touch points. Have just a one sort of tone of voice. Treat every touch point as a consumer or individual will see them. People don't make distinctions between this is an app, this is the customer service, this is a website, this is my interaction in the store or in the physical touch point. For them, it's one experience. An organization on the other side is structured and often compartmentalized in order to solve these different problems. When an experience is inconsistent is when the different functions within a company are not talking enough to each other, or they're not aligned, they don't have a common plan. So in that sense, design can help sort of pull everything together in a more cohesive, coherent plan. An example of that is if you ever been to recently to Disney World, and there's this experience called My Magic experience. My Magic experience, and of course consists of different touch points that are really carefully designed sort of to be part of, since they are part of a closed ecosystem, of course, to create a cohesive, a consistent experience, right? And that's very successful because Disney World controls every aspect of that experience within the park, and that experience extends beyond the experience within the park, and that's, of course, it's part of the My Magic experience, but even just within the park, there's so much control over that experience that design can really carefully plan and determine how all the different touch points will behave, what are the possible ways that people interact with the services, and plan ahead. In healthcare, it's different. You can have solutions like this one from Proteus. Like they're this ingestible pills of basically medicine that communicates, has sensors in it and a chip that communicates with a patch that's attached to your body to sort of communicate the level of absorption of that of the medicine and the level of efficacy, and if you're consistent with the treatment, if you're adherent to the treatment. But that's just one part of it. It's not the whole healthcare space, right? So it's just one experience within a broad and large experience that people have in the healthcare space. So we don't have that same level of control. However, whatever we do, whatever a healthcare company, health insurance company do, can be much more intentional and part of a larger plan. So in that sense, we talk about design as the artifact, as the method, as the process that builds that artifact. Talk about how design can create value and define value, but also how design can be a planning tool, right? It can be used to plan and orchestrate these end-to-end, large, complex experiences. And that's not just that. It's that design can also help create the conditions for that experience to happen. So we've seen probably many times just the massive service design blueprints, like that define what is the customer journey and what the service sort of provides across different stages of that journey. What's missing most of the time is that information is just information that is on a blueprint, right? Is the organization ready to deliver that type of value? Are they structured in the right way? Do they have the right talent? Do they have the right tools? And that's another challenge that the designers especially have to face. It's not just about defining what the ideal experience is, how to design that's beautifully crafted, meaningful products. It's about also helping the organization create the conditions to deliver that value, to be able to run a service of that type. And that, of course, is an example for GE. The GE sort of pioneered worked really heavily on this approach to create a UX center of excellence, a sort of repository of tools and resources to define the ways of working and also how different functions, for instance, within a company work together, what are the skills that is needed, and how you define sort of quality checks or quality control over what it's been done and delivered to customers. So in that sense, these three perspectives about the evolution of design go from really design as a methodology, as a tool to define and create value, and as a way to help plan, be very intentional about the experience that you want to create and deliver across touch points. But then when you look at this, you think, well, is this just a job? Is this a job for designers? Are the designers the only one that should care about these things? Of course not. Design is not for designers only. So that's a big shift. I would say that this is the biggest shift in design. Think about that design is something that is associated with the act of designing, that designers, the act of making something. No, design is, as I just covered, the themes that I just covered just reveal and show that it's the design is made of all the decisions that are made in order to define something and deliver something. So, and there are a lot of stakeholders involved in this decision. So it's not just about design. So a design-led company, as the graph showed before there, of course, they're seeing the return of investment because they are focusing on design. Doesn't mean that they put a designer in charge of everything. They simply adopt a design as an approach, as a methodology to define what's right to do and how to go about the solution of the problem. And the same, so to say, as we sort of explore what are the sort of the new frontiers of healthcare or the evolution of healthcare, and how design based on this sort of definition can be helpful, this seems that it's quite easy to understand basically how design, what's the role of design in impacting and defining sort of the evolution of the healthcare ecosystem. Healthcare is a very broad and difficult subject and complex, highly regulated, and of course there are different angles and different ways to define what are the challenges in healthcare. I'm going to use only one today, and it's about empowerment. So the healthcare can evolve. So the future of healthcare is sort of predicated on the ability of individuals to take action, to be advocate of their own health, to be sort of CEOs of their health. They see themselves as being empowered and control, informed to make decisions about how to sort of prevent or reduce the risk to develop certain conditions. And that empowerment, of course, comes with awareness, comes with education, comes with a lot of things, but mostly comes from having the access to that information. Today, that information is fragmented. So if you think about where is the information about your blood test, or where is the information about other exams that you took, and where is the information about the data about your lifestyle and your activities? They're all in different places, and it's really hard to reconcile this information, to make sense of data. So that's one of the things that it's a big challenge, right? In order for someone to feel empowered to make decisions or understand what they should do in order to prevent certain conditions or to live in general a healthy life. And the issue with information is that there's only information. It's really hard to understand what do I do now with this information. So if you look at the difference between, like, your bank account and your health account on your phone, right? It's just a lot of data. Well, that's interesting. I can see, my sleep patterns. I understand. I can see how active I was, or I can even review my health records. But then, who's going to tell me, or how do I understand what I should do? Right? So a few years ago, I worked with my team, and I was a frog for a client, Rambus, to define sort of a vision about sort of a healthcare, or more mostly about being proactive, right? And the goal of it was about sort of how do we, from a technology perspective, how do we sort of make this happen, but also how this is actually beneficial and helpful for individuals. And so this part is more the most probably exciting when you look at it, all this information, all these different sensors that will help you sort of build a picture about yourself. And then all this information is uploaded to the cloud, and there's a way to access this information. So you can have stats, or maybe you can have graphs. What's helpful here is not that. It's not the figures that you see there, the stats and graphs, but is that individual in the background that was the one in making sense for the individual about all of this information. So of course, this is important, having transparency and visibility over your health information. It's fundamental, because if you don't have visibility, there's no transparency, there's less, of course, you don't feel empowered to have control or understand that information. But it's the sense-making part that is missing. And that's a big challenge, right? How, for instance, physicians can help you make sense or reconcile information that are based on your DNA or your genetic information with your lifestyle information. There's, at the moment, like not everybody is prepared to help you make these connections. And therefore, a lot of information that is available by yourself, it's not used, or you cannot use it. And prevention overall comes with the quality of the experience. Right? This is Forward in San Francisco. There's a company sort of taking a very, almost like as being defined, a sort of Apple-like approach to healthcare in a way. So there was a study recently, I don't remember the source, but they interviewed like millennials, like there are 83 million millennials in the United States. And they asked them basically what, they want to sort of probe for the ideal experience when they interact with a hospital or health insurance. And sort of the conclusion was that it should be like interacting with the Apple Genius Bar. So when you go to an Apple store, there's a Genius Bar. What's great about that? There is someone that guides you, that makes things simple for you, that explains things to you. And of course, that approach is not scalable. Like if you think about it, it cannot be just one individual or individuals that will help you guide you in the sort of your understanding of the health space. There should be tools, there should be other types of resources. But overall, an approach that is very considerate, that meets you where you are. That's what's missing. And that's what some companies are trying to solve. But again, this is just one experience. And it's a very sort of recreating a closed ecosystem in a way where you have more control. Because as soon as you work in an open ecosystem, there are things that are, it's very hard to control them, of course, because the experience that you have with an hospital is different from the experience that you will have your insurance and then you will have with a specialist or another service. So it's really hard to create an end-to-end experience in that sense. What you can control, like, is dividing this overall experience into small portions and have more and exercise more control over that. Access to health data, of course, is fundamental, as I said, like to take a preventative approach. But then, again, how you make sense of that data. Is there anything out there that helps make sense? There's a big question mark. And an approach that empowers individuals to take action, of course, leads to prevention, reduces the chronic disease and the cost that is, of course, implied with the management of chronic diseases, and provides better care. The goal is to improve outcomes, of course. It's not about delivering a service or a medicine. It's really delivering outcomes. And so in order to deliver outcomes, you need to have technologies in place that allows to create a feedback loop between how your consumption of that or your treatment and the outcomes of that, how to improve that, how to optimize that. All of these things are very common also in other industries, but in healthcare, of course, things are a little slower, but the same patterns basically can be applied to the healthcare space. So when you think about, in conclusion, what role design can play in the healthcare space, it goes back to that. And of course, this is not the only way. These are the three perspectives that I discussed. But if we take a methodological approach to the definition of problems and the solutions for the healthcare space, thinking about more with a holistic perspective about the system and the impact that solutions have in the overall system. And we take an approach that is more considered about the definition of value, what value is, and how we create that value. And at the end, how we enable this change, how we support organizations in improving themselves, in enhancing themselves in order to be more enabled, so that we'll be able to deliver that kind of valuable experience that we designed. Of course, this is up for the sort of conversation we're going to have like in a minute. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have and discuss further these topics. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite another Kristen into the space that I mean, asking you a lot of questions.
Just a second.
I have to sit here. No time. This is my chair.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is it working, the microphone? Yes, okay. Thank you at first for the presentation. And I hope everyone enjoying talking more about what's the role of the design in this space, because sometimes it's like smoking, a little bit confusing. Who want to start?
I'd love to start.
Okay.
So many questions. You talked about the empowered patient, and obviously patients and all of us have so much more data than we ever had before. And patients are now, a participant in a process as opposed to a recipient of a service. And in addition, they have much higher expectations of those service touch points and the digital touch points. And I'm curious to hear where you're seeing areas of progress in the industry and where you see the biggest gaps and opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Well, from a sort of an overall perspective, when we talk about empower, so patients, the sort of the main considerations about that they're not just patients. So being patient is a stage, right? It's a hopefully is a transitory sort of stage, right? So, and they're not even consumers, as you mentioned. Of course, healthcare can be seen as a product in a way, and it should be almost like a consumer product, treated the same way. People are not consumers just of a healthcare or health or health services. They're like, in order to make decision and be advocate for their health, they need to be feel empowered. They need to be. It's more than being a consumer. It's almost like being an active shareholder of that value. So seeing ways of seeing that are like sort of supporting sort of a change in that sense is all products and services that allow, so give you transparency over the reasons why, for instance, you have that condition or you develop that condition. So you can build understanding in that sense. And for instance, like products like and services like in the space that I'm very familiar with, of course, the personal genomics give you that sense of understanding if you want. Then there's, of course, the tools that allow to make plan actions. So that's something that if you think about like just a few years ago, that there weren't like products or services that allow you to also define a preventative plan, right? There was always something that was more sort of delegated to the conversation you will have your physician or different specialists, but it's nothing that was a tool or something that could be used to do that. And the third point is that as a consumer, as an empowered sort of a patient, you need to be also able to connect your lifestyle, so what you do in your environment, since it's so important, with that information. So steps that that even companies like Fitbit are taking, just in sort of connecting your lifestyle information with health information. Right? This sort of seems an obvious direction to connect lifestyle information with medical records and genetic information, for instance. That will give you like a full picture and allow you to make better actions and take better actions as a preventative measure.
And even pick the right wine, as I saw in one of yours.
Oh, that's a recreational aspect of it. It's also very interesting. Right? I mean, there are certain inclination and propensities that we have also that affect also the way we perceive, we taste things. So there's some people that cannot taste bitter, and people that, like me, when you eat cilantro, it tastes like soap, right? So there's certain things that, of course, is true and might determine also how you enjoy a meal or you enjoy wine, for instance.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'll go next. In terms of our industry, so we're talking about the patient, but we are supposedly a creative agency, and we provide our clients with the design service, the creative design service. How do you see the improvement between a Fitbit communication and a big, huge pharma company that is selling the latest on a cancer treatment? Mm-hmm. How do we help this client here to understand that slide that says the return of investment is 200% when you use design correctly? So I'm curious and eager to learn how I can help them say, hey, stop doing this website that people don't know what to do with and listen to us.
Yeah.
How can we do that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely very common. And two things about this. First of all, like using design or setting expectations about design in the same way you will define a business KPI, it's really tricky. It's really hard because there are certain things that have provide a qualitative like benefit rather than a benefit. You can always, not always you can quantify this benefit, but as overall, when you can see that companies that invest in the quality of the experience of their products and services see the value, see a growth, right? But the conversation should not be just about how design can increase, like can provide an immediate or direct return on the investment against a specific sort of KPI, like conversion or like retention. Of course, there are ways to measure that, usually in hindsight, more than just to forecast. It's really hard to forecast that. So one thing, one perspective on that, just to shift the conversation, just from just, of course, design in terms of like a way to improve the quality of the business, right? But not putting at the same level of other like drivers, other factors. That's one thing. The other thing is about how early you engage with an organization or a client. Of course, if you get to the point where all the strategy, all the plan was done, and part of that plan was to have a website that will do X, Y, and Z, then you are at that point, you engage at a moment where you have less influence over that process, right? And if you engage earlier, then it's about defining the overall strategy. And you don't need to be the only person in this case, agency, or like to help a client define this, but you can be an informed stakeholder in that process. So at that point, you have way more influence. You can bring in the perspective of the customer. You can provide consumer insights, and you can help sort of shape the opportunity areas, so that when you will be sort of tasked to develop or build something that will be part of a strategy that makes more sense, right? And it's not something that you say, why are we doing this?
Yes, thank you.
I have a question around experience and value. So a lot of health systems, all health systems are really under pressure to be creating value. And payers are reimbursing health systems based on patient surveys and overall outcomes. In fact, last month, the Cleveland Clinic just launched an office for caregiver experience. So they're even thinking about the caregiver, not just the patient. Are you seeing this happening more and more? Are you seeing this as a trend, or is this a fad? Because I think there are certain health systems like Cleveland Clinic who are very good at that, and others not as much. So can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the industry and what's really cool and interesting, and what's just a fad?
Yeah, I think there's a distinction, if you want, between a sort of a prevention or everything that allows an individual also to take a preventative approach towards their health, and then how care is delivered, like when you need it, and who are the actors also that play a key role in sort of in that space. The caregiver, like the value that a family or a support network can provide in order to improve the outcomes, it's obvious. Like it's something that just a lot of the success of treatments or cures is predicated also on the value, of course, of the care, the quality of the care. I don't think this is a fad. I don't think this is gonna go away anytime. I mean, it shouldn't, also because it would not make sense, right? We should definitely provide more tools, more ways for people to avoid to get to a point where they need care. But once they need that care, should be much more sort of considerate and deliver in different ways that are also don't increase the cost of care. Right? That's one of the things that is one of the biggest issues, of course. It's about the cost of managing chronic diseases, for instance. So if the sort of this journey that we define, that we sort of shape, or the ideal journey that we shape in healthcare starts with prevention, but also continues at least in different stages with the quality of care. And the role of caregiver is fundamental in this space.
Well, my question is much more about something you said before. Now, you say the often we consider, often we're talking all about the patient experience, but we forget the patient is a transitional moment of the experience itself. And the same person can be in the same time, in the moment it can be a customer, and the moment it can be a user. And this kind of thinking and framing the problem, it's pretty common on the people coming from a digital experience age where we are very system focused, but often in the healthcare, it's difficult actually shift this perception. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we are only focused on the patient without forget the other stage. Right. How do you feel in the market right now? This shifting is changing the healthcare, or not changing at all, or what kind of friction for changing this perception?
I think the sort of the main issue, it's always about not having enough a well-informed perspective of who's the audience. Like that's, as you mentioned, like not everyone is a patient, or is it just a patient also only at times, right? Hopefully. And maybe an approach that I've seen is, of course, that is a big step forward when in order to design or develop like a product or service, we use personas. So we try to identify like consumer types, right? The issue that I see with that still is just we think about those as a static definition of you. So I'm designing for the patient. Now I'm designing for the person that is healthy, might become a patient, but now I'm designing for a family. Now I'm designing for the caregiver, right? But these are like different modes in which like individuals operate, like and understanding that every definition of the consumer or consumer type is transitional. And so you need to design and think about a system that is flexible so to accommodate needs of an evolving sort of a consumer type or user type. And of course, that's obviously common in terms of mindset for those that design digital systems, because you sort of think that way. You think about who's the user type, and when you define user stories or things like that, you say, as a user, I want to do this, right? So there's a lot of attention about the different, how you segment sort of users and how they interact with a service. It's sort of it's going to take some time, of course, but I see, and also especially when I was in consulting, a lot of really good promising signs of understanding a shifting from a static definition of individuals to more behavioral archetypes and how behaviors sort of evolve and how you accommodate this for design for the behavior.
Do you think, just because you mentioned a persona, do you think we should start to consider persona more like a way to testing an idea versus a way to design solution?
Well, in order to design something, you need to know, first of all, who you're designing for, right? So in that sense, I think what I think we should do just to reduce, sort of make it faster, make it at least more agile, the process of defining. So these archetypical users, because that's always like an interpretation of that. It's never the real world. There's always like there's some conclusion that you draw by interviewing people and you think this is more or less of the user type. But there are individuals out there. They're unique, right? There's no people that identify themselves with that persona or not. So I would say personas or archetypes can be definitely useful and are important to define and design, but then what's most important is the iteration that comes based on the interaction that people have with the product or service.
Okay.
I think Alfonso has a question.
Hi. I remember one of the slides that you were showing that basically you were asking me permission to share my DNA with other people, with other companies. I mean, that is kind of a big shift. I guess you're doing some research with people. What is their reaction? How do they react to that new kind of level of, I don't know, I would say intrusion or, well, how are people reacting to that?
Well, if you think, I think this is also pretty like a timely conversation given like the news about Facebook, but as an individual, and you should own your information, and you can and you decide what you want to do with your information. So in order to have like better suggestions from Netflix, you are allowing Netflix to know about your like content consumption patterns, and you're fine with that, right? In order to have a reward, to have a service that have some value back, right? Same thing if they're aware a product or service that can be more valuable if you share with that product or service some more other type of information, and you are consent, you're fine with that. That's basically a non-issue in that sense. Of course, you need to be aware of what are the consequences, the implications of sharing that information. But if you are aware, and if the informed consent sort of form that you sign in order to allow this transaction, it's clear enough, and it's not usually written in legalese or in a way that is obscure to you or unfamiliar to you. At that point, you're empowered to make this decision, right? And that will boil down to personal preferences. So I think moving forward, the concept, the notion of privacy, it's a notion of much more to a personal setting. So each one of us has different thresholds and different comfort level with sharing information. People don't care that much. Other people care very much about that. So it should be free to decide what you want to do with that information. So in that case, if there would be a future in where an application prompts you with a dialogue that says, this app would like to have access to your DNA information, maybe they're stored on your phone or somewhere else, in order to improve the service, and you know what that means, and then it's not a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be scary at all.
Let's just hope that they don't use that DNA to give you higher insurance rates.
Exactly.
Because if it comes back that I have a heart condition or propensity to that, my insurance is going to go up and all of that. So I'm hoping they're putting rules in place, and hopefully Ogilvy, Washington is lobbyists doing that or something.
Well, there's a non-discrimination act that Bush created that should at least prevent discrimination and based on information that are like genetic information. So your employer, your insurance should not have discriminate you based on those facts. But things for sure will change over time, and that's of course that's the issue and a big challenge about like the definition of, as we have a credit score, the sort of health scores or things or things of that kind. That's very controversial, very tricky themes to discuss.
Are you seeing improved patient outcomes or doctor outcome, whatever it might be, when institution or whatever actually employ more design-oriented and data, real clear outcomes that are consumable? Are you seeing it based on the implementation design?
Well, definitely I don't have the sort of exact data, but there's definitely an improvement in terms of the perception from a consumer standpoint. If you think about like what's the most, one of the things that individuals or patients in that case like care the most about is like, for instance, the bedside manner, right? And that's something that if you're able to translate that into a service or a product, a digital service or product, that of course improves the quality of the experience. As a consequence, improves the level of engagement that you have with your information and with a preventative sort of approach. But definitely seems like, of course, that if you have a good experience and you feel like you have transparency and visibility about information that are related to your health, you feel much more empowered to take action. And of course, this will lead to better outcomes.
One aspect of empowered patients that I've seen in some consumer research I've done is it's a two-sided coin, because on the one hand, you're empowered to take ownership of your health and to change your fundamental wellness. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you don't, it's your fault. So health has now this sort of moral quality for people that it's virtuous if you're healthy because you must have lived a good life and you must have done good things. And if you didn't, maybe that was your fault. Mm-hmm. This is very different from the way people experienced health in the past. So maybe it was disempowered, but it was also felt to just kind of just happen to you. Mm-hmm. So I wonder from a design perspective if there's a way to help people navigate this new moral landscape of health, because I think it's very tricky.
Yeah. Oh, you're spot on. That's definitely the big challenge. Empowerment comes also with responsibility, right? The same way we interact with financial information. We all can decide how much you want to contribute to your 401k. If you want to contribute zero, you can do that if you want. There's no paternalistic sort of approach, at least in the United States, in that sense. Coming from Europe, things are different. Even in the healthcare space, like you feel in that sense much more connected to your physician, because the physician is going to take care of me. The family doctor is going to take care of me, like my employer is going to take care of me, so there's less. In that sense, you're less empowered, but you're more sort of reassured, right? And if you take it to the extreme, like a fully sort of where you are an empowered healthcare sort of a health advocate, so you can make all the decisions. I don't think we'll ever get to that point. Of course, we can say it's not up to you to decide if you need surgery or not. So it's within sort of reasonable sort of limits. What's the level of power that you can exercise? But of course, there's need to have some guidance, right? Some guidance, especially with given the volume of data that we every day generate about ourselves. And then what do you do with this information? How do you inform decisions based on this information? Many times the physician is not equipped to sort of deal with that, and then you're somehow left alone in that sense. So there's definitely need for, and this can be a new industry in a way, or it can be a new kind of form of support that is closer to a concierge in a way than maybe to someone that could provide you answers. Maybe someone can help you find the answers, right? And can tell you what are the next steps, what are the things you should be aware of. And or it could be baked in and should be baked into the products and services that healthcare companies provide. Some others?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I loved how you talked about design not just as an artifact, but it's also a process. It's a problem-solving tool. And a lot of our clients are familiar and comfortable with design as the artifact, very uncomfortable with the process of design as a method of solving problems. And that's our responsibility to help walk our clients through this process and help them feel as comfortable as they can. But it's a messy process. It's, you have to wrestle through a lot of things in this process in order to get to the right solution. Have you experienced that working with organizations, and are there specific things that you've done to help get them through that process in a way that makes them feel confident that the design methodology is a solid way of solving problems?
Yeah, and that definitely is a challenge for design firms, especially just how they evolve. I could say, knowing what's the impact of design, it's different from being able to sort of provide that type of support and a support that is cross-disciplinary, that understands business, that understands technology, that understands brand. So the problem is that if you say design, good design means good business. Okay, fine. I understand that. I can see that. How are you going to help me doing that? And if you bring only the perspective of visual design, let's say, or interaction design, or you don't have business acumen, you don't have a way you don't know the language. You know the language to speak with different types of stakeholders within an organization. At that point, your process becomes isolated, almost like it's inevitably, right? And then at that point, if you cannot interact, you cannot have certain type of conversations, then your role will be relegated to executing on something. So that's the responsibility. Is not we talk a lot about how clients should understand better, the design is not just about the artifact, but we should talk more about how we are able to position that credibly. Right? And do we have that multidisciplinary approach, or are we just putting forward just one of the skill set that you need, but we are not then able to speak all the different languages that are needed. Right.
If I could add to that, so in the pharmaceutical industry, it's an industry that's based on sort of rational approaches and very analytical. If you think of where pharmaceuticals came from, these are scientists who created drugs, who, over time, the industry was about does the drug work? Does it not work? They're designing clinical trials around the outcomes as in the results, the efficacy, the safety, you know, the dosing schedule, and it's all very linear, rational. And so what you're talking about is, you know, designing trials and designing patient experiences that are beyond the pill, that are inclusive of, you know, the caregiver, you know, when they take their medication, the reminders, the adherence, all that they go through. And I think that, you know, the healthcare industry has historically been very far behind. I mean, I can order my pizza and I know exactly when the sauce is being put on the pie, and, you know, I can go to the gas station and I can watch a video while I'm, you know, putting gas in my car. And then, you know, I think that what you're talking about is sort of taking an industry that's been sort of behind and bringing it really forward. And because all our pharma clients are saying we're patient-centric, but I think, you know, designing that within how they deal with clinical studies, with medications, with everything that they do, it needs to be, the thinking needs to be infused across all aspects of, to your point, the silos of companies. So everyone's thinking about it, not just one patient, not just one user experience person or caregiver experience person, but so it's a great opportunity to take it to a new level.
Yeah. And in that sense, you as in the design, sort of thinking about this, not just design, but everybody involved in sort of in the design process, the main goal is to be able to make those connections for the organization, right? Because if you just have one, if you just represent one perspective, like this is the ideal experience. Look what happens in other industries. Why can't this be this way, right? But you're not able then to make the connection between the idea that you put forward, for instance, like this concept. Is there a business rationale? Is there a scientific value? How do you sort of support, like what are the grounds that you're using to justify that solution? Cannot be just what patients or users want.
And I think the way it's rational and the way you justify it is it's all about value now in the healthcare industry. So how are you creating value? And if you can demonstrate that these all help outcomes, then you can justify it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, one more question. If you look at where I mean, with a much more empowered patient, more data, much more access, more information, and actually more tools being developed to help you, especially when you think about preventiveness. Where do you see this going? I mean, at the end, this has to be more patient-centric, so I should be able to control my healthcare. And technology and the boom of technology is actually making it a little bit more daunting. Like which tool is the best tool? Why everything is so disconnected? So where do you see it going in terms of, is there going to be like a unified patient experience and then everyone should be hooking into that? Like from a health provider, hospital, doctors, preventive? Because now it doesn't feel like patient-centric like many other industries. I mean, just the boom of technology has been the boom of tools.
Right.
But there's not like a unified standard experience.
Yeah.
Where do you see this?
Well, the issue of creating unified experiences that they need to be either really well concerted between the different parties involved, so or provided by just one, like organization. So think about like Kaiser Permanente, Geisinger, Cleveland Clinics. So if you're able to establish some form of end-to-end sort of experience, and then you have more control, and of course then you can provide all the tools that individuals or patients need just to have a better care, a better experience. If it's just an open, of course, ecosystem, there's less control. And since I don't think there will be in terms of any closed ecosystem, even if there are attempts like, Amazon entering like the healthcare space just to create like a new paradigms, new ways of approaching like healthcare problems from given the experience in other spaces, it will always continue to be a lot of sort of on the shoulder, on the responsibility, based on the responsibility of the individual. So there will be, I think there's an incredible opportunity in sort of a new industry, or at least a new kind of services that will bridge this gap between like this amount of information that is available, all the decisions you have to make, you don't feel equipped to make those decisions, you're not within maybe a closed ecosystem where you have much more control and guidance. So at that point, you need someone can help you. So an example of that, an analogy of that is in financial services. At some point, depending on your preference, you may want to have a financial advisor, right? Financial advisor will ask you a lot of questions about like, what are your goals, how you live, what's your lifestyle, a lot of information that will help sort of build a plan, a financial plan, for instance, so that you're going to get to retirement with no money, right? Same thing, you'd be an approach that allows you to define a preventative plan, so you don't get risk sort of, or reduce the risk to develop certain conditions. And maybe there's a space there for a third party or someone that can play that role of informing you, guiding you in that approach, if you cannot find that in the existing sort of actors or touch points.
Someone else? No. Sound like we are good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roberto. And I want just to inform everybody here, we have another event incoming Monday 23. It will be all about design and leadership, and you can find probably more information soon in your email. Thank you.
Thank you.